Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cleveland Clinic's CEO and President, Dr. Toby Cosgrove, Chairman of Progressive Corporation, Peter B. Lewis, and world-renowned architect, Frank Gehry.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Cleveland Clinic Speaker Series, Ideas for Tomorrow. All of you here are joined today by hundreds of participants at our 12 hospitals and 14 family health centers ranging from Toronto to Florida, and we're delighted to have all of them. This is a great demonstration of this community's interest in the life of the mind. And to these two individuals who have been drawn together by a deep respect, friendship, and the relentless need to innovate and create. Our first innovator is our native son, Peter B. Lewis. Peter Lewis, chairman and former CEO of Progressive Corporation, is a visionary insurance executive and a philanthropist. Born and raised in Cleveland Heights, he has strengthened the economy and the institutions of Northeast Ohio and nationally, leaving his indelible mark on the worlds of business, education, and art. A graduate of Princeton University, Mr. Lewis acquired control of Progressive Insurance in 1965 and a pioneering leverage buyout. As CEO, Mr. Lewis took Progressive from a company with $6 million in revenues and 100 employees to the nation's number 3 largest auto insurer with 27,000 employees and annual sales of $14 billion. To put this in perspective, if you purchased 100 shares of Progressive for $1,800 in 1971 when it went public, you would now be holding $2.2 million worth of stock. Progressive, under Mr. Lewis's leadership, revolutionized the auto industry with strong humanistic philosophy and innovative customer service. As a corporate patron of the arts, Progressive, through talent and expertise of Toby Lewis, built a collection of contemporary art that has works compatible with many major museums. Since retiring in 2000, Mr. Lewis has remained an astute philanthropist, investing in social and political actions, as well as arts and education. A trustee of Princeton University, he made the single largest gift that the university ever received of $1.1 million. Most recently, he pledged $80 million to Creative and Performing Arts Center, bringing the total contribution to that university to $230 million. Mr. Lewis has also given generously to the Guggenheim Museum and numerous other worthy causes. An avid sportsman and yachtsman, Mr. Lewis uses his yacht, Lone Ranger, named after his childhood hero, to visit some of the most remote locations on the earth. The Lewis and Gehry collaboration began when they met at the Cleveland Center for Contemporary Art in the early 1980s. This encounter framed the basis for a long-term relationship in which Mr. Lewis supported hundreds of design iterations for Progressive corporate headquarters and Lewis's personal home. Neither were built. Nevertheless, this journey resulted in the perfection of the forms that manifested themselves in the signature style that would rock the world, including such buildings as the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, the Peter B. Lewis Building at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University, and the new Peter B. Lewis Science Library at Princeton. It is said that patrons rarely go down in history with artists. that they support. There are a few exceptions. Michelangelo and Lorenzo de' Medici, Franz Haydn and Nicholas Esterhazy, and likely Peter Lewis and Frank Gehry. The second innovator I would like to introduce is Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry was born in Toronto, which may explain his passion for hockey. Raised in Los Angeles and graduated from the University of Southern California and studied city planning at Harvard. As a sculptor, he has created notable bodies of public and private works. As an architect, the New York Times has described his output as among the most profound and brilliant works of architecture of our time. Time magazine called Guggenheim Museum Bilbao the most important building of the century. The 500% increase in tourism to Bilbao is directly attributable to this museum. Mr. Gehry's other well-known buildings include the Vitra Design Museum in Germany, the Weissman Art Museum in Minneapolis, the Experience Music Project in Seattle, and the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. His buildings have received over 100 national and regional AIA awards. Frank Gehry has received widespread recognition, honorary degrees, and countless awards for his work. Most significantly, the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the National Medal of Arts, the Gold Medal of the American Institute of Architects, and the Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service. In 2002, he formed Gehry Partners with a staff of 175. Its current projects include Brooklyn's Atlantic Yards, a $4 billion mixed-use development over 22 acres and 17 iconic buildings including office, residential, retail, and a new sports and entertainment arena to be the home of the New Jersey Nets. And most recently, his design for the Guggenheim Museum in Abu Dhabi. Close friend, filmmaker Sidney Pollack stated, "Perhaps the most remarkable is the fact that Frank never assumed the mantle of the starchitect that the world tried to force upon him. He has never lost touch with the child within, and therefore he has no barrier to trying new things." Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to introduce Peter B. Lewis and Frank Gehry, giants in their fields, whose accomplishments are stunning and whose collaborative efforts are legendary. Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Toby. It is a real honor to be here. I'm humbled, and I thank you for inviting me. I am particularly thrilled to share this evening with Frank Gehry, clearly a genius, arguably the greatest architect of our time, and an absolutely wonderful friend. Our topic today is innovation. I spent my life in a growing business. Growth drives innovation. Growth demands innovation. Innovation drives growth. It is a very happy cycle. And without one, the other fails. I can say that growing a business, especially one with Progressive's record, is too long a story, too complex a process, too emotional and absorbing an activity to distill in 15 minutes or less. But that's what I'm going to try to do tonight. As Toby said, when I started as CEO, when I started in the company, there were 40 people. And when I became CEO, there were 100. And for many years, I managed by intuition, by example, and by being involved in virtually everything that went on in the company. But there came a point in the late 70s when we had become too big for me to know what was going on everywhere and to know what everybody was doing and to do the monitoring and teaching that I had been able to do when we were smaller. And that required me to figure out, that was a big problem, which I did, and I spent one of the nice things about growth is you spend your entire life, I spent my entire life dealing with issues I'd never heard of before and had no idea what to do about them. What I did was reflect for quite some time on what had caused Progressive's success to that time, and we had been very successful up to that time by the intuitive management route. And I got my arms around that, and then I wrote it down in a set of what I called core values, which I referred to as a pragmatist 10 commandments. There were only 5 of them. And those core values were established to guide our people's behavior, to limit what people could do, and to motivate them to do more, better. I think maybe in talking a little bit about the core values statement, I can illustrate what the demands and excitement and elements of innovation and growth, that innovation growth mix are, at least in our case. Once I got this statement written down, and that it didn't happen until after there was a great deal of consultation and lots of drafting and communication about it, but once it was written down, I set out to embed it in the DNA of the company, and after literally hundreds of talks to our people and saying the same words over and over again, it began to become a mantra. In our annual report every year, virtually the first thing in the annual report is spelling out Progressive's core values, and they are the basis for how we do things. The first core value is integrity, and integrity for us is honesty, saying it as you perceive it to be, and openness. And Progressive has been aggressively open, much more so than virtually anybody else in like circumstances. And in fact, that transparency distinguishes us and is an asset for us. The second value is the golden rule, which is quite simple. We all know it. Doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But the tricky part of that is, in order to know what you want them to do, want them to do unto you, you've got to know that. You've got to know a lot about yourself. And it requires to operate under the golden rule requires a lot of self-understanding and self-examination. The third value is objectives. We discovered early on that we were much more likely to achieve whatever we set out to achieve, let alone the great things we were setting out to achieve, if people were clear about what that was, if it were expressed in words that people understood, could get their arms around, and could feel good about. And that then filtered all the way down. Not only we do it to say what the company was about, but we had to tell every single person what their role was, negotiate that with them, and then objectives are only meaningful if you have a basis for measuring their achievement or not. And Progressive has become one of the great innovative things is how brilliant Progressive has become at measuring. Measurement is something that is a very creative process. The real special hook, or one of the real special hooks in Progressive, is our fourth core value, and that's excellence. We define excellence as doing better than you did before. And that can drive ambitious A-types crazy, because you can always do better than you did before, no matter how well you did. And that is a very distinguishing feature of Progressive. And from that comes all sorts of innovation and creativity. The art collection's motivation was to hang these works by contemporary artists, which could be described to most of the world as crazy, on the walls to let our people know it was okay to be crazy. It also was very important to encourage people to try things and to reward them very generously if they succeeded, but more importantly, not to punish them when they didn't, which was most of the time. But we learned that because, I learned it because every innovation I came up, 90% of the innovations I came up with, which were absolutely brilliant, bombed when we implemented them. We also have had to learn, because if you're doing how not only to measure but how to test. As we got bigger, we couldn't just roll out a new idea. We had to, because it was too expensive, we had to begin to figure out how to test things, and that is also a very creative process. We are now in an interesting situation. We are learning how to advertise and market something that was not a part of our existence until about a decade ago. And the amount of energy and creativity that's going into that is mind-boggling. The last core value is profit. We decided that there was no sense devoting the huge amount of capital and the energy of so many people to an enterprise if there weren't the proper rewards for that capital and the human energy. There are now some other elements that didn't get into the core values but have been key to Progressive's success and absolutely essential to the creativity. At first, we have a rule in Progressive. If you're not having fun, don't be here. You must be happy in your job. And everybody isn't happy, and so one of the things that has to be done is the people who aren't happy have to be allowed to go away comfortably. We have focused on hiring superb people from the beginning. One of the most innovative things we did, which seems so obvious, is nobody in our industry ever recruited and hired an MBA that I'm aware of. We started doing that in the 70s, and that may have been a crucial creative effort. And when we were a small auto insurance company in Cleveland, Ohio, trying to tell these Harvard MBAs that this was their life's opportunity, that took some creativity also. Part of attracting superb people and keeping them motivated is not only to reward them very generously, which we do, but also growth gives them the opportunities that many people want, the opportunity to grow and risk and learn and grow themselves, and that's been an implicit part of the Progressive success, and all of it's driven by new ideas about how to serve more customers better. Another focus that has driven Progressive is the development of those people, and that is mostly, Progressive's training is largely on the job, and people are learning largely by their own experiences, trying, failing, trying, succeeding. But everybody in our organization is asked to do things they never thought of before. I found that an exciting way to live, and so do the kinds of people that enjoy Progressive. There is a whole list of operating things that we have done that no one ever did before us. We were the first company in 1937 when we were founded to sell auto insurance door to door. We were the first company to have monthly payments. We were, the leveraged buyout that Toby mentioned was the first I'd ever heard of in a situation like ours. We financed our building on Wilson Mills originally with a tax-free bond, which had never been done before. But in terms of service to our customers, we have developed and invented, because many elements of it are new, or were new when they were introduced, claim service that is 24/7, available 24/7. We have cars, which we call immediate response vehicles, that come running out to an accident. We have now a service that we're now calling concierge, where we take over all the repairs. We are helping in car replacement situations. These are things nobody ever did before. They sound rather mundane, but they make our business what it is. We were the first company to offer competitive quoting. We are the innovators on the auto insurance on the web, the largest writer of auto insurance on the web, the first writer and the largest writer of auto insurance on the web, and on, many examples of what we have, the innovations that have come out of it. Maybe the most, sometimes I think that my most extraordinary business accomplishment was succession. The time came for me to retire, and we went through what, in retrospect, was a very intelligent and very successful succession process, something we had never had to figure out how to do before. And I've just been non-executive chairman since Y2K, and the key to our when I left, there were 7,000 people, and we were doing $7 billion in business, or 6.5. So the growth that Toby described came after me, and is under the direct result of the our seamless transition, and the fact that Glenn Renwick, who I think is here tonight, took over, and he has. I always thought I was pretty good at my job, and he's made me look like an amateur, so it's been wonderful. I have also had the pleasure, and one of the things that made Frank and me friends, and one of my greatest joys in life, was the work we did together. I met Frank when he came here to lecture at the Cleveland Center for Contemporary Art lecture series. I think Anita Cosgrove was president of the Cleveland Center at that time. And we have been through the projects that Toby described. We've got a building going up in Princeton now, and who knows what's next. But what's next right now is you get to hear from Frank Gehry. Frank?
So, in all the time I've known Peter, he never talked about all that business stuff to me. It's interesting. I've been lucky to have him as a patron saint. I didn't know that's what he was, but in hindsight, It's pretty obvious, right? And I cherish that relationship. Not that he's a patron saint, but that we're good friends. Being at the Cleveland Clinic is kind of a nice thing because I'm 78 and I'm probably going to need you sooner. It's interesting that a big chunk of my life is involved with Cleveland, not only the Peter Lewis connection, but the Forest City Ratner connection. And I just had lunch today with Bruce Ratner at Coney Island. We went to Nathan's and had a hot dog. And we wondered if Cousin Albert would be here tonight and decided that he probably wouldn't waste his time. And he's here. Thank you. I'm having a lot of fun working with them in Brooklyn on an extraordinary project. And if we pull off even half of what we're trying to do, it'll be something special. My life, the creative life, I think, owes a lot to sitting with my grandfather as a kid and having him read Talmud to me and discuss it. And although I'm not very religious, the Talmud starts with why, and these Talmudic scholars sit around and argue about the most incredible things, back and forth, arguing about why things are the way they are. And I think that was built into me, and it is kind of the essence of creativity. And I also from the Talmud is the golden rule that Peter mentioned, and I find that a guiding principle. As well, the introspection that he talked about is crucial to that, and I agree with that. I should have bought the stock when I met him, right? I remember asking him, but of course he couldn't say anything because that's illegal. So I didn't know that. So I thought, well, maybe he was telling me not to buy it. But, so I didn't. I started my practice with very little money, $20 actually, 1962. I had a wife and 2 kids, and I got one little job for K Jewelry Store, K Jewelers in LA. The CEO had been to Japan and fell in love with Japanese architecture. And when I came out of school, we were studying architecture in California in the 40s and early 50s. We had a lot of the returning GIs as teachers, and they'd been to Japan and came back with these beautiful images. And it fit the Southern California climate to build with wood. At the time, they were building tons of tract houses, and with 2x4 studs, and it was all over the place. And the organization of the wood structures by the Japanese was very compelling, very seductive. And so I was, some of my early buildings, you would think I was from Japan. And the guy from K Jewelers saw that and asked me to do a little warehouse for him. It's still there. It's on Fairfax Avenue in LA near Pico. And the facade is still there. It's kind of funny now to look at it, but and from that I got to do a few jewelry stores, and they weren't very visionary in architecture, these people, but and they used to ask me, why do I keep asking questions about things? Why don't I just do what they tell me? And so from the beginning, I was a pain in the ass. I started out, I didn't think I was going to be me, as I've been described. And I'm still not really me, as it's been described, but in my head. Architecture is a service business. I was trained to do that, and the clients are important. And so I built that into my DNA and still operate on that basis. As time's gone on, I have a little more power in the equation. I'm a little more of a partner, less of a cute little creative thing that they put up with. Now I've become something a little more valuable, and as we found out in Bilbao, it paid off financially for that little town. And so when you create value by what you do, then you have a little more to say in the equation. It's still the client's money. It's still their game, and we still respect that. The office is now close to 200 people, and it was just evaluated that everybody's selling companies, and I'm not interested in selling my company, but architects have been in the news now selling companies, and I'm part of an investment group that has people that evaluate companies. And just for fun, since the topic has been in the news, I asked them to evaluate us. And I was ecstatic how well we looked as a business. And I'm not really a businessman by profession, but I built in some basic rules from the $20 at the beginning that I would never exceed the amount of money that the client was paying, that I would never borrow money, and that I would always pay people for work that worked with me. And so I never got caught in the Kool-Aid that some of my colleagues have of getting a lot of free student labor. That's once you get on that, you can't get off it. It's a difficult model. And so in the beginning, what that meant is I had to work round the clock, late nights, a lot of late, because whatever my assistants couldn't do, I had to do myself, because that was the beginnings. And so I used to do working drawings and write specifications and do all the stuff that you had to do. And I trained with a big commercial architectural firm, the Victor Gruen office, for 5 years before I opened my office, and worked for Tishman's and a lot of the big developers, some of them still around. And when I started my office, because of the Gruen connection, I met Jim Rouse and started to do work for the Rouse Company in Maryland, and built 2 or 3 buildings at Columbia, and then worked with Jim on a lot of stuff. He was a great mentor as well. That led me to doing a shopping center in where I lived in Santa Monica, called Santa Monica Place, and it was being built the same time as I did my house in '78, and in this movie that Sidney Pollack did, it shows you what happened with that. The president of the Rouse Company came to dinner at the same day as the opening of the shopping center, And he saw my house and he thought it was crazy. And he said, "You must like this." And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." And he said, "Well, then you can't possibly like that," pointing over to the shopping center. And I said, "Well, it's not. It's not as good, but it's okay." And he said, why are you doing that?" And we had a few drinks, and he was right. And we shook hands. And we decided we weren't going to work together anymore. And I had 40 people in the office. I went in and had to let them all go, and started back with 3 people. And it was the right thing to do. And so now, since then, I try to work with people that we can create partnerships where there's mutual respect, and that they tap into and use my talents to their best interests, hopefully. And that has led to a much calmer and rewarding experience. I think that the Bilbao Building surprised all of us in that it was in this sleepy little town. The steel mills were closing down. The shipping industry was closing down. It was an ugly place, except it was saved by these beautiful green hills. And the community, the Basques are very independent of Madrid, and they have and they made a calculation that they wanted to develop culture in their city as a competitive asset to the rest of the country. And they built a new airport. They built a new concert hall, which I didn't do, but and they rebuilt this museum. And it was a business decision on their part. And I was surprised when I realized that, because they calculated this. And they even asked me in the beginning, they used the term Sydney Opera House. They said they wanted to brand the city. They wanted, like the Sydney Opera House branded Australia. Of course, all these things didn't mean much to me when I was working on it. I didn't think of it that way. I thought, oh, well, that's great. If you believe in that, you believe in the tooth fairy. But I just worked to make the best building I could for the topic. And it happened. And a lot of the research that I was able to do working for Peter on his funny house, which never got built. Thank God it didn't get built. He probably would have hated it. If you know Peter, he doesn't live like that anyway. That was always disturbing to me. He'd be talking about these fancy things and gadgets, and that's not how he lives. He lives in a very modest apartment. So I could never see him living there anyway. But anyway, that research in which he egged me on, he'd come to the office and say, why don't you try this? Why don't you can you bring in some artists? Let's get more energy going. And we brought in the Oldenburgs, and we brought in Richard Serra, and we brought in Frank Stella, and God knows who else we brought in. It created a kind of a think tank of form and materials and ideas and just a way of working. And I was on the path already, but this just revved it up and kicked it up a lot of notches, and really has been a major issue. There's a slide up there of my first office in a warehouse. And the white ceiling is a mock-up of a office system for the Rouse Company's headquarters in Maryland, where we explored a hard ceiling and indirect light, because indirect light is better on the eyes, more efficient, and all that stuff. We developed a whole interior system. This was in the early 70s, and so I built in mock-up spaces and did that right in the same office, and we continue to do that. That table in the front, that desk is cardboard. It's one of the first of the cardboard pieces, and those chairs in the front are, which went on to Bloomingdale's and stuff like that. And then this little office was in Venice, California. And, you know, so fancy clients would come in and look at this and they'd walk out, right? So it never occurred to me to create a fancy office so I'd attract, you know, because that gives you credibility. It just never entered my mind. I would never go there. And the office got a little bigger, and then lots of models always around, and then it got bigger, and then it got bigger. And now we're expanding on this. A big part of it is the Brooklyn project, and maybe we're going to do the project in Abu Dhabi. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to let it go for questions with all of you. That makes sense at this point?
Sure.
Okay. I have the other building, but
why don't you bring the lights up a little bit, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative, Peter, to ask you the first question, and then I'll let Frank answer back here. Why didn't you ever build the buildings?
Well, the first building we didn't build was the Progressive's downtown headquarters, which started after my house planning started and ended before my house planning ended. And the reason we didn't build that is that we couldn't get anybody, any natural leader to lead that project. The governor didn't want to do it. The mayor didn't. The governor was Celeste at that time. The mayor was Mike White at that time. He didn't want to do it. And there was just no leadership. And it was a project where everybody in this town said we love the idea, but there was no way to get it done. So it just died. My house died because we had been designing and designing for 12 years. My budget had started at $5 million, and I had, by the time 12 years had expanded, I'd expanded the budget to $40 million, absolute top, not a penny over. And I also was prudent enough to say we got to get a legitimate bid before, because we had no idea what we were doing. Frank knew what he was doing, but we had no idea what it was going to cost. And we finally went out and got a legitimate bid. It came in at $82 million. That fact, plus the fact that I had aged 12 years and no longer wanted a castle in Cleveland, is what ended that project.
Frank, you got any rebuttal on that?
Well, I never thought he really wanted to. He was having so much fun playing with us, and flying in and sitting with the models and meeting the artists and we held meetings in your house and my place, and he would just ask us to do things. The reason it cost so much is is there were so many things in it. There were tunnels for escape routes. There were the basement was worked out for art storage, so it was going to be like museum quality mechanical systems and security systems. So it became, it became funny in a way, but I think they were all of these were provocative to us, to the designers, to my office, to think about things in a different way. And I think that provocation was interesting to him because he knew he was doing it. And it was fun doing it, I think.
Oh, yeah, it was a ball.
Because...
Let's go over here.
Yes. First of all, Mr. Lewis, I want to thank you not just for your business acumen, but more so because I see your personal philosophy of doing more for more people. And Mr. Gehry, I want to first say that I am totally in awe of your genius. I must preface my question that I'm going to ask from a quote from Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright is quoted as saying that there wasn't as great an architect 500 years before he came, and there wouldn't be an architect like him 500 years after he died. He was a genius, but he was mistaken, as we can see by your genius, Mr. Gehry.
No, I think he was right. On both counts, he was right and right.
But I have a question. My question is that would you agree that America should rectify a terrible injustice and build a Frank Lloyd Wright designed building in our nation's capital dedicated to American architects and architecture? And do you think you could get your friend, Mr. Lewis, to help? I don't mean that for him to pay for it, but I would think what is needed is somebody who would be willing to organize such a project and create and do something that has been a terrible injustice for a long, long time. That's thank you. I'll wait for your answer.
You want me to say something?
Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Lewis is putting up a lot of money to fix the Guggenheim Museum in New York City and bring it back to the what it was supposed to be in the Frank Lloyd Wright design. I don't know which building in Washington you're referring to that you want him to build. Which one? It's hard to...
No, first of all, the mall is filled, I know that. But there are places in Washington, D.C., there is land available for a building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright.
But which one? Because he's not here.
Yes, guess Taliesin West has designs by Wright that could be utilized for such a building and incorporated into a building for architecture and architects. There actually is not a building in Washington, D.C. designed by Wright, nor is there really a building for architecture and American architects. We could go from the beginning to now and the future with such a building. So, I mean, that's the idea. I'm sure that with the creativity that I see in front of me, that it could be something that could be done.
I don't know.
I would say, in a very real way, I empathize with your thought here, which is why my parting shot at the Guggenheim was to finance most of the renovation. And I must say that we have spent a lot of money in the last 2 years trying to figure out what needed renovating. And as far as I can tell, the investigations have led to a conclusion that you're right about Frank Lloyd Wright, that he was a lot of genius in that building. In fact, a couple of the problems in the cracking of the superstructure are because mistakes that were specifically made by the contractor have been identified where Wright specified it properly and they didn't follow the specifications. It's quite interesting. But I'm not interested in financing any building in Washington.
First, I'd like to thank both gentlemen for coming and spending time with us this afternoon. And my question is for Mr. Gehry. Is green architecture, sustainable construction, LEED certification, is that a fad in architecture, or is that something that's going to be with us for some time?
Well, I believe it's an issue, and it's an important issue, and I don't quite agree with my friend Michael Crichton about that it's not happening. I think that my office does whatever we can within the projects we do, and we work with the best people in the field. They happen to be a German firm that does all of our work on that. And I don't have pictures of Abu Dhabi, but it's designed as a desert building, taking advantage of the air currents to. I think it sometimes has become a fetish, and like a lot of not so talented designers use it as a mantra to smokescreen their inability to create a beautiful space. And I think architecture has that other mandate. It has to be a livable, beautiful, uplifting, all those things, emotionally charged, so that, I mean, what are we living for? This is, so it's balancing those, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can do both, and I think it's a very important issue. It's just that when I work, I don't make it, I don't use it as a mantra. I just do it. You just do it. Just
Sounds like the answer is a little bit of both. It sounds like the answer is a little bit of both.
Well, I think it's an important issue. I'm not belittling it. I'm just saying it has to be incorporated, but it has to also be incorporated in a way that it becomes beautiful. It's very difficult to do that because some of the paraphernalia that's being made is hard to absorb into a building and make it look good. And so you've got to, I mean, there are inventions that have been made that could be used in building surfaces that would generate power. They've been deep-sixed for reasons I don't know. JPL created a bubbly skin in a metal that absolutely was an efficient solar voltaic skin, and it would be just beautiful, but they didn't make it. So people are doing stuff. We're working on some stuff with concrete that will be energy efficient and will generate power and stuff like that. But I'm working on it, but I don't talk about it.
Thank you.
Over here.
Okay, my name is Christa Baumann, and I really would like to thank both of you. I'm an assistant professor in finance here at the Weatherhead School, and I feel extremely privileged that every day I get to go to a building that's just so beautiful and really inspires us to do great teaching and also research. So I really would like to thank you for that. Also, Mr. Lewis, actually have to thank you as well. Last year, I am an assistant professor, and last year I actually was awarded a chaired position, which is sponsored by you. It's the Lewis Progressive Chair. And I really want to thank you for, helping our schools and helping us assistant professors get even better at research and teaching, and you allow us to do that. So I want to personally thank you for that. Oh, one sec. I also have a question, actually. So it's not just one thing, thank you. So I really enjoyed listening to your stories, to both your stories, and I thought it was very inspiring. The question that I have for both of you is, in all of the years that you have worked together, you must have learned a lot from each other. What is the key thing that you learned from each other in all those years? Thank you.
Peter?
Frank? Can we come back at the end of the test?
Yeah. Some of it I can't talk about publicly.
I would say, just as I'd like to come back at the end of the test and review my answer, but I learned a lot about making a friendship with a grown man. One of the things that happens when you are leading is that you're by yourself, and it can be very lonely. And not only by yourself, but you're concentrating on what you're doing, so most of the time you are alone, and even though there are dozens of people around, you're still alone. And having the opportunity to establish a equal friendship, which may, not being a client, it's been one of the best things that ever happened to our relationship. I learned that was possible, and that Frank's a great guy to do it with.
We don't want to press. Let's go over here.
Gentlemen, my name's Craig James. Thanks so much tonight. Mr. Lewis, about 4 years ago, I think it was, you shared that you were a great fan of screwballs, if I remember correctly. And I wondered if you could define for us how you define screwball, and whether in our companies or our communities, how can we endeavor to be screwballier? Thank you.
I think Frank did it. I think he said it. He said he got obsessed with why. And I think screwballs are never, speaking for myself, are always wondering why it is the way it is and why it isn't better than it is. And for the kind of screwball that appeals to me, the resistance you get to that, one gets to that way of thinking is mind-boggling, and it takes a lot of either craziness or self-confidence to stick with your ideas, which make perfectly good sense to you, but no one else seems to get them. And I like people who no one else seems to get their ideas.
And that's what I learned from him. The inspiration for me was watching a very astute businessman play like that, and that there are, and finally you realize that really successful business people do work intuitively, do explore. But Peter was that model for me very early on, and it gave me an entree into that world.
Thank you.
Dave, right here.
Yeah, this is a question from Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, you've been such a wonderful innovator in the insurance industry, but I wonder what your thoughts are on some of your friends and colleagues at one of the other companies in that domain, the Geico company, and their use of passion plays and existential angst in cavemen and so forth, and the kinds of advertisements that they've been coming out with, which are really quite different than most insurance ads that we've seen in the past.
My feeling is terrible jealousy.
That's what
He's
he meant
green.
by being straight.
Go ahead, over here.
Yes, I've enjoyed your talk tonight, and my name is Paul Penfield. I'm the owner of Frank Lloyd Wright's Penfield House, and I found the first gentleman's question very intriguing. My parents were both original clients of Frank Lloyd Wright, and during the course of their relationship with him, he designed 2 houses, one of which remains unbuilt. I think that you can relate to that, Peter. And this first gentleman had mentioned that he thinks that there ought to be a building built in Washington, D.C. And our research on this second house has indicated that it's Frank Lloyd Wright's last residential commission. And it should be built on the site here in Northeast Ohio that it was originally designed for. And my question is to Mr. Gehry. Did, in your Bilbao experience, give you any indication as to how to raise a community's awareness of its own architectural potential?
When I first presented the schemes for Bilbao, they held a candlelight vigil against me.
That sounds hopeful.
And then the ETA published a fatwa, or whatever they call it, saying, kill the American architect. And so I used to stand next to the president whenever I visited. When the building was built, and since then, I could live in Bilbao for free for the rest of my life, with all services, all food, all lodging paid for. I walk down the street. I should just go there. It's great for your ego. Little old ladies touch me, and so I think you build in by example, by doing it. I don't think you can public relations it or sell an idea like that. They're bonded to this building, and it's worked. And kids, the kids going to college from Bilbao, the number of going into architecture has risen just visibly, mind-bogglingly. And so it just does it, you know. If you and I would love to see Frank Lloyd Wright in Washington, except he's not here to do it.
Correct.
And without a client, I don't think you can make, even him, you cannot really make a good building. You need that interaction, you need that foil. A couple times in my career, I tried to build my own buildings, and I had a hell of a time. I'm trying to build my own house now, and I just can't do it. It's just, you need that. My wife pretends to be the client sometimes.
On that note, I think we'll go over here for another question.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. This has been really great. I have a question for you, Mr. Gehry. In your opinion, how does architecture impact health and wellness?
Well, it goes to the emotional, you know. I think there's some value in that a room can be uplifting, can make you feel good. Public spaces can make you feel good. Of course, they have to be developed for, like the concert hall in LA has created a very strong emotional response, positive, from a lot of the community. And it's a building that I use myself because I go to the concerts a lot. And so I'm there with these people, and I've seen over the last few years a great response, positive response to the building. And every concert is sold out, and it's damn hard to get there. And I don't know how they get there. because the freeway most of the people come from the west side of LA, and the freeway's jammed, and you have to leave at 5 in the afternoon to get there for an 8 o'clock concert. So, but they're there every night. It's sold out. It's the most used place. So I think architecture does have the ability to do that. And obviously, there have been a lot of examples of that in private houses, like the Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, the Prairie houses, especially for me. When I go in them, there's an emotional response. When I go visit Ronchamp in France by Corbusier, it's a tiny little chapel. I can't hold back the tears. Every time I go there, I start crying. It's so beautiful. And I think those are very, like listening to music, like looking at art, like reading a book. They're uplifting reasons for living experiences, and they must contribute something to the health and well-being of a person. I hope that's true. Most hospitals aren't designed by great architects.
How many hospitals have you designed? And you're looking for one?
Nobody's ever asked me.
Aha. So noted. Last question over here.
Good evening. I just want to thank you for opening up this opportunity to truly get to know you on a personal level. My name is Stacy Cooper, and I'm the principal for the Cleveland School of Architecture and Design at John Hay, just down the street. I wish I could take my whole student panel here, but I only have 5 of them with me tonight. But they would like to ask you personally, from both of you, what are some key points that they should look for as aspiring architects for the future?
Find Peter Lewis.
I would say the one thing I learned from Frank is that they need to pay attention to their client. Frank's right that a non-involved client isn't a good client.
Right.
And in order to get their clients involved, they need to pay real attention, listen to what they're saying, and find out what they mean.
But in doing that, you got to pick people that you want to work with and that are intellectually stimulating. I mean, you can find clients and pay attention to them. You go down the tubes with them. It's got to be a fit of some kind. The most important thing, I think, is to be oneself. You've all heard this a million times. Is not to be afraid of allowing your intuition and accepting where that takes you. And it's if you contrive to go somewhere, you end up looking like somebody else's work or something else. You can't. And not everybody can design this. We're not all the same. So people, if you're honest with yourself, you find the niches where you feel comfortable and are happy working in the subject of architecture. And it's not all doing the design. I mean, there's a lot of pleasure in supervising the building and watching it go up and making sure it's done properly and being in on the production of the drawings that enable it to be built and the process. And there's a lot of invention possible in the construction industry. I believe in the next years it'll totally be paperless. My own life, I'm obsolete. Kids now are designing completely on the computer and transferring it completely to construction, all online, kind of. I don't even know what I'm talking about. We have been working with computers, with the French computer stuff for a while because of the shapes I use, and that has led to another sideline where we're training people how to manage construction, and now we're developing the program to maintain buildings, stuff I'm really personally not that involved with. To sit around and figure out how you're going to maintain these things isn't what I dream about. But so there's a whole new world of invention, and so far the people who are designing on the computer haven't produced buildings that are humanistic friendly. There's a different language, and I find that alien and strange. And my son is just in architecture school in Vienna, and I asked him about it, and he said, no, that, so he bought that Kool-Aid, and he's down the road. And so I think you're going to find this world is changing rapidly, and you got to be on your toes and follow it and watch it and not deny it. And even myself, I fight my denial of some of these things, because I know that this is happening, and it's probably going to be for the good in the long run. But
well, we have had a terrific hour, and I think that all of us have gained enormously from the innovations of these two individuals, and the collaboration that they have brought together has enriched all of our lives. And I personally, and I'm sure I speak for all of you, feel enriched for this last hour and the experience that you've provided us. And I want to thank you both very much.